This is a BMW K100 1000cc motorbike. I had 12 motorbikes and this was my favourite bike, and I was one of the first people in Scotland to get one. I got it brand new, and it was a totally radical motorbike at the time. Nothing like it was around. BMW had completely changed the design of the motorbikes. Before that, their reputation was based on what was called Boxer twins, which is a twin cylinder head, a lateral cylinder head with both sides of the bike where it was symmetrical. You had a cylinder head sticking out horizontally at either side. Made them actually quite vulnerable to damage. And I also had Honda and Kawasaki motorbikes, which often tended to be V-twins. So the cylinder heads were in a V shape but still symmetrical. BMW with this model completely changed the whole design to something quite radical, which I'll explain. The first motorbike I had was a Suzuki 100cc 2-stroke. Then I got a Z200 actually. That was still a 2-stroke engine, a red motorbike. The Suzuki was a single cylinder 100cc 2-stroke, which meant you had to put in oil as well as petrol, and it would burn them both. Quite smoky. The Z200 was twice the capacity, and it was also a 2-stroke. Next motorbike I got the 100 Suzuki was kind of okay, very good bike because it was my first motorbike. The next one, the Z200, was quite an enjoyable bike as well. The Z250 was a bit flashier, and I had a little fairing on it, a kind of small cockpit style fairing, and also it had some nice custom panniers. So Z250cc, a nice colour blue. It was quite a fashionable, striking, trendy sort of motorbike. After that I got a BMW R45 450cc. That was a Boxer twin. And then I went on to get a Silverwing, Honda Silverwing CX500 with a very big touring fairing and massive big panniers. Very comfortable bike for touring around, with a full fairing like a kind of police bike, but only it was a red, deep red style. Very stylised, glamorous bike, the Silverwing. And then GCX 750 Honda, and a CB900. Very powerful bikes. And these motorbikes were 4-strokes, internal combustion engines, which meant they took petrol just like a car engine. You didn't mix it with oil as you would do with a 2-stroke. And eventually I worked my way to a BMW 1000cc, but this was a bike you need to have quite a lot of experience before you would tackle something like this big bike, because it was quite quite a bike, took some handling, and it was so solid that it was quite different from all the Japanese motorbikes. It seemed quite flimsy and lightweight, insubstantial, compared to this very, very solid motorbike, and really heavy as well. And it sat down low on the road. This bike was designed for long distance travelling, touring. It was a touring machine, and it had a really low centre of gravity and a radical engine design, which meant the weight of the engine was really low down, and this kept it very stable on the road because all the weight was concentrated below the centre of gravity, and this made it really stable on the road. And in order for BMW to produce something like this, they changed motorbike design entirely. So rather than having a cylinder head in a symmetrical formation, splitting the capacity across the cylinders, what they did was they created a fuel injection engine, fuel injection driven, so it wasn't no longer any carburetors, and this was the stuff of Formula One driving. No one had ever realistically thought you could get a fuel injection bike, just buy it from a dealer. So no carburetor, fuel injection, but the engine itself was sitting on its side, which meant that if you looked at the motorbike from this side, where you're looking at the right hand side, what you're looking at when you look towards the engine, that is actually the sump, and the sump holds the oil for lubrication. And this was very, very unusual because the sump in a car is a basin at the bottom of the engine, and BMW had turned the engine on its side. So what you got was the top of the engine was on the left hand side, and the bottom of the engine was on the right hand side, so each side of the motorbike looked completely different. I used to see pictures of it before I got one, and I thought, oh, it's like two different motorbikes. Well, it was, because if you looked at it from one side, it looked different because of the engine. And because the sump was sitting there on the right, it wasn't at the bottom, so if you switched the engine off, the oil wouldn't drain to the bottom as it would do in a sump. It would have to sit to the right, and it didn't actually do that. So therefore, if you started it up again, it would start to smoke because of the oil wasn't getting through the lubrication. So you had to keep it moving, and this was very radical. And that with the fuel injectors, it was something that people were completely surprised by, and it was a highly desirable type of motorbike, and I was one of the first to get one in Scotland. And the reason why I got one was because the Inverness dealer wanted one in the area. They wanted someone to represent them and kind of essentially get more sales by me essentially advertising this motorbike. It was blood red, metallic, fantastic finish, and looked so different from any other motorbike at the time. And the seat itself was a design project for PhD students, and the panniers were all custom designed, and the engine completely new style of engine. Essentially BMW had been making the same engines for decades, maybe since well before the Second World War, and this was their big change. And I think it was a 5 or 6 gallon tank, which was really big, and it was water cooled, air intake at the front, but a water cooling system, just like a car. And the disc brakes were drilled because they were so powerful that they were used to heat up and glow. If I stopped in the dark on a country road, you would see the red glow from the disc brakes. The main feature of it was its stability. It was very, very solid on the road, but it had a lot of weight for its size. A short wheelbase, which means the distance between the back and front axle was shorter than normal, and this made the bike sit upright a bit. If you look at a proper racing cyclist, the ones like Chris Hoy, the Olympian that they cycle on these rinks, you would notice that the distance between the back and front axle very, very close, because that means that they're pushed up the way, and you get this angled rake. You get a very sharp rake, which is the angle of the front forks, and that means they're almost standing up on their bicycle, and with a short rake. A touring bicycle like the one I was using, it's got a wider gap between the front and back axle, which makes it a softer angle or rake on the front. You get it the same in cars as well. So this gave it a completely different feel from any Japanese motorbike, and all the controls were very chunky, very solid, and big switches. You'd be working these switches with with big fat gloves on, so they had to be big chunky switches. And I had put crash bars on to protect the engine in case you dropped it over as it was off its stand. You wouldn't be able to pick it up. It's too heavy to actually get back upright yourself. Just too solid. And the getting it onto its centre stand was quite a knack, and lots of people weren't able to get one of these motorbikes because they simply couldn't get it onto its centre stand. They would be in the dealership, and the person would see if they could get it onto its centre stand, because you couldn't really sell a motorbike to someone if they couldn't put it on its stand. There's also a side stand as well, but you can't always rely on the side stand. So to get it up on its centre stand took quite a technique, a combination of brute force and technique. You would get it onto its stand, but you're lifting an incredible amount of weight up into the air to get it to hook onto its stand. The tyres, front and rear tyres, were a feature as well, completely different on motorbikes, of course. The front tyre and the rear tyre have got different tread patterns, and what they rely on is a very smooth profile, a nice curve, and when you've got all this weight of the motorbike, including yourself, it's all sitting on what amounts to maybe just 3 millimeters of width of tread. It's just a very apex point, the very top of the curve of the profile, which is only 2 or 3 millimeters. Everything's just sitting on top of that. So tyre pressure, very important to keep that profile, and that gives you the balance. But because of that, all the forces on there, that profile would wear out very fast. So only after 1,000 miles you would start to lose the profile of your tyre, and it was less stable. Another thing that prevented people from getting one of these bikes was you needed to be fairly long-legged, because when you were sitting on the seat and it was off its stand, with me it was just the soles of my boots were touching the ground, but only just. And if I changed tyres, new tyres, that would lift the seat up by a millimetre or two. It was enough to take me slightly off the ground so that I couldn't put my feet flat on the ground, which means I couldn't easily hold it. And that was enough to knock out quite a lot of people. If you were 5'8", 9, even 10, you wouldn't be able to straddle the bike and stand with it because your legs wouldn't be long enough, or you might have to use platform boots, something like that. The bike itself was capable of going about 138 miles per hour, and in those days I used to travel on the A9. There was no speed cameras around, and I used to sit at 120 miles per hour, and I was protected by a little cockpit fairing just over the headlight, and it glides the air right over your head. Your head is above, you're not looking through that little fairing cockpit, the little shield, you're looking over it, but the design of it means that the air flies right over your head. And going at that speed, I would fold my mirrors in towards me at either side, because that would slow you down significantly. Also, I would tuck my head behind that little screen, and you'd find that your speed would just increase as well, taking away the drag. And I never used brakes at all to stop. I used engine braking. Only very occasionally would I use brakes if I was coming to a complete stop. As I was driving on the A9 at 120 miles per hour, just sitting there, it became quite normal. I would just be adjusted to that. And at that speed, you look very, very far ahead. You're looking a mile to 2 miles ahead, because you need to react to something that could be happening that far away. And what happens then is you don't see what's in front of you. So something like maybe 50 yards to 100 yards, you can't see. It's outside your perception, because your vision is looking way, way ahead for any sign of a potential danger or obstacle. And what happened then was, because caravans had a maximum speed limit of 50 miles per hour, I was going at 120. So I actually thought that people had parked their caravans on the carriageway, which I thought was pretty stupid. I thought, what is that person doing, parking their caravan? It's stationary on the carriageway. But after a while I realised they weren't stationary. They were going at 50 miles per hour and I was going at 120. So I was passing them at 70. So it was as if they were stationary and I was flying by at 70 miles per hour. But what was actually happening in relative terms was they were travelling at 50 and I was travelling at 120. So it's exactly the same effect. I was passing them as if they were parked, because I was clearing them at 70 miles per hour. And this could be quite dangerous because you wouldn't see them. They were too close to you, bizarrely. What you had to be in control of was the torque and the brake horsepower. Japanese bikes were designed to have very top end brake horsepower, very fast acceleration and getting to their top speed quickly, whereas this bike could do that, but it was really based around having tremendous torque, which is pulling power, rotational power. So the dynamics of the engine were designed to be able to maintain very high speeds. So even if you were going up slope, even if the hill was gradient was quite extreme, it wouldn't notice it. You didn't have to put much more push onto the throttle because it just acted as if it wasn't there. It had so much power that hills didn't seem to matter. You just really just glided up them. It had 150 brake horsepower, a lot more than a 3-litre car, but it was all on a power to weight ratio, so 20% of the weight of a car, a 3-litre car, but with more brake horsepower, made it very powerful. So you had to be very careful because you had 6 gears and you had the brake for your rear wheel worked by your left foot, and the brake for the front wheel worked by your right hand, the throttle using your right hand, the clutch using your left hand, and so gear, clutch, throttle, front brake, rear brake. You had to be very coordinated because if you got anything like that wrong, that would be the end of it. You would get out of balance, and instantly out of balance. So the rear brake was just for control because it wasn't giving you any braking at all. It can't because of forward momentum transference. As soon as you hit the front brake, you can't stab at it, you just put it on. The forks descend down and all the momentum flies forward past you, past the front wheel, and the back brake has no effect whatsoever. Forward inertia transference. So you had to be aware of this, and you always had to have the brakes at maximum capacity with the discs very close to the clamp so that you could instantly get them on. And it was no chain drive and closed shaft drive, very similar to a car transmission system. So no chain to be seen. It wouldn't stretch because it wasn't there. It was inside a transmission, and you had a powerful tool with a lot of responsibility, and it was something to be reckoned with. And it was experimental, and a lot of people were scared of it as to what to make of it. But I was pretty bold, and I wanted the best motorbike around, so I got one of these and discovered it was so far ahead of a lot of motorbikes that when I went back to trying out Japanese motorbikes, they didn't seem credible. They seemed very flimsy, really lightweight switches, lightweight frame. They seemed as if they weren't made out of anything, because this thing was so solid and so stable. So quite a radical change of motorbike design, and BMW were innovators there. The fuel consumption was about 40 to 45 to the gallon, which is very good for a big powerful motorbike like that. And the most expensive thing was the tyre consumption, because you had to regularly get new tyres. Being a soft compound, so you could stick to the road, then they would wear down very fast, and you would lose the profile. So tyres were costing about £120 each, more than what your fuel was costing, having to replace the tyres every couple of months. It's costing almost more for rubber than it was for fuel. What happened when I got the bike, they'd accidentally printed the wrong registration plate, and I hadn't noticed it, and only sometime later I took it in for a service, and when I was picking it back up, they said, your bike's outside, here's the keys. I said, well, it's not outside. They said, well, it is, it's just out there. I said, well, no, it's not. There's another bike out there. I said, but it's not mine. What are you talking about? It's a different registration. And we're all looking at it with a double take. They'd accidentally printed the wrong plate, the wrong number plate, and I'd been driving around essentially illegally for quite a long time with a number plate which wasn't the same as what what was on the logbook, and this caused quite a carry on. Eventually, I rode the bike for 3 years, and then I got the managing director of the franchise. He gave me all my money back because I queried a whole number of different things. I wrote him a 14-page letter, and he came out to my house with a cheque, and he presented me with a Fiat car and a cheque for thousands of pounds, and gave me my money back. But that's another story. This is